Hello. Albright Fellows, Albright faculty, our friends, supporters, everybody. My name is Olga Shurchkov, and I am the faculty director of the Albright Institute. And I'm here to introduce Sara Minkara, class of 2011. But in addition to being a faculty director of Albright, I'm also an economics faculty member. So I was Sara's professor when I was a baby professor. I was a baby faculty member. It was my second year here, and I had the absolute privilege of having Sara in two of my courses, in macroeconomics and in behavioral economics. So throughout my reading of her incredible bio, I'm also going to interject a little bit of my personal memories and thoughts about Sara and how amazing she really is. So I'll start with the formality and read her incredible. By the way, her bio could go on for, like, it's a book, really, so we could go on and on. But Sara Minkara is a former ambassador-level U.S. diplomat and global strategist who advises Fortune 500 executives and senior government leaders on disability, authentic leadership, and reimagining the future. Appointed by President Biden as the U.S. Special Advisor on International Disability Rights, she integrated disability across U.S. foreign policy in more than 70 countries and created the Disability Foreign Policy Playbook, a unified framework for embedding disability within foreign policy priorities across bureaus, embassies, and senior leadership. She advanced disability perspectives in key global arenas, including AI and digital economies, climate, trade, and peace and security. She also led the U.S. delegation to the G7 Disability Ministerial and elevated disability through APEC, ASEAN, and C5+1. Sara is a founder and principal of In the Dark, a blindfolded experiential methodology that accelerates decision-making, strengthens communication, and builds high-trust leadership across global corporations and institutions. And as a bit of a side note, I believe I was Sara's test subject of In the Dark back when she was a student here, when I wore a blindfold throughout the day, kind of meandering through Pendleton East, and it was really a transformative experience. It was just phenomenal, and I will always cherish it. Through her independent advisory practice, she guides public and private sector leaders on embedding disability within strategy, risk, operations, and emerging domains. She has developed and is teaching the first ever course on disability and diplomacy at Georgetown University, Secretary Albright's own institution where she taught as well. And she's advancing a new academic and policy frontier and equipping future diplomats with the tools to advance disability in foreign policy. Previously, Sara founded and led Empowerment Through Integration, a global nonprofit expanding opportunities for youth with disabilities in the Middle East and North Africa. And this, by the way, this nonprofit she started prior to Wellesley as a high school, in high school. Thinking back to Sara's time at Wellesley, I wanted to reflect a bit, and I wanted to go back to my recommendation letter that I wrote to her for Harvard Kennedy School, where she ended up going. And I just wanted to read, if you bear with me, a few excerpts from that letter, and she will have never seen it before. So anyway, this is all not going to be a surprise to her. But I want to begin this recommendation by saying that Sara was an inspiration to me and other students at Wellesley. She is brilliant, hardworking, independent, and truly unafraid of any challenge life throws her way. Not only does Sara take her courses seriously and performs at the highest possible level, she also has research experience at both Wellesley and MIT on topics ranging from participation in politics to economic history to political economy. Sara's skills, ambitions, and intellectual curiosity reach far outside the classroom. She's an advocate for the blind community in the U.S., Lebanon, where she's from originally, and in many other developing countries. Sara has lobbied in Washington in favor of making technologies, such as the iPhone, accessible to blind people, and in favor of making hybrid vehicles safe for blind pedestrians. Sara is a natural-born leader and a confident public speaker, which makes her well-suited for a fruitful career in policymaking and activism. And I mean, I'm pretty sure Sara didn't need my prediction of this, but she more than lived up to it, and I'm just so thrilled to see this. A graduate of Wellesley and Harvard Kennedy School, Sara's work has been recognized already by Forbes 30 Under 30, the Clinton Global Initiative, Vital Voices, and the MIT Ideas Award. And I'm just so happy and honored to bring Sara Minkara to Albright and to share her passion, wisdom, and vision, and for you all to see what a bright light she is at Wellesley and in the world. Thank you so much, Sara. Take it away.
Oh my God, Olga, you're so sweet, and it's so, it's one of the, it's sometimes so, I don't want to say embarrassing, but like just to listen through all of it. I just love you, Olga, and thank you for just being an amazing mentor and a leader in my life. And you guys are lucky to have professors. Like, I don't think I've realized how lucky I was when I had professors at Wellesley until I left Wellesley. So I just want to say huge thank you to you, Olga, and all the amazing professors here. Okay, so we're going to get started. I want everyone to snap for me. Okay, very good. That gives me kind of, and how far can I walk? Okay, good. Okay, so if I do run into you guys, I'm so sorry. In the front row. So, okay, and I want to also just acknowledge my amazing colleague. Where's Hannah? There we go. Hannah, give her a round of applause, everyone. She's the woman that makes a lot of things happen, okay? Okay, so let's get started. So today we are going to talk about how do we convince systems to care about things that they don't really want to care about, okay? And I'm going to use, throughout the entire hour, I'm going to use disability as the main case study, because as you guys heard in my bio, all I do is disability, 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 okay? So I want to first start off, and by the way, we're going to make this super interactive. And when I ask a question, please do not raise your hand. I cannot see your hand. Just shout it out, okay? It would be nice if you say your name just so I can start getting familiarized with people's names with their voices, okay? Sounds good? Yes. Very good. Okay, so I do want to start off, before I dive into kind of the disability case study when I was at the State Department, I do want to start off with saying, do you guys think systems and spaces, society at large, cares about disability? No. Why not?
Because it's not the majority experience.
It's not the majority of experience. Okay. What's your name, by the way?
My name's Courtney.
Courtney. Awesome. What else?
If somebody doesn't understand it, it might make them uncomfortable.
Okay. It makes people sometimes uncomfortable if they don't understand it. Definitely. What else?
It can be inconveniencing for the able-bodied.
Mm-hmm. It can be inconveniencing for people without disabilities, definitely. What else?
It might take time and money to imagine a new solution.
It might take time and money to imagine a solution. Yeah. What else?
The world as we know it is also just built for, typically for the able-bodied to begin with, so it can be difficult, or I guess people are unwilling to change it.
Mm-hmm. So systems and spaces are typically built and made for people without disabilities, yeah? What else?
Sometimes disabilities can be invisible, or you wouldn't know someone has one until you told you, and people might not want to go out of their way to discover that.
Yeah. Sometimes disability is non-apparent. We actually like to say non-apparent, exactly. Yep. What else? Somewhere over there in that corner, I haven't heard.
People might expect others to do it and not themselves.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of times where people say, it's not my responsibility. It's the disability department or the accommodations department or whatever, definitely. What else?
My name is Ash, and adding to that point, because of people, it's so much harder for people with disabilities to access those spaces of power when they could have a chance to bring those issues into the table. Just kind of like it's like a cycle.
Ableism leads to systems and spaces built with so many barriers of accessibility, preventing us from actually accessing spaces and bring our voices, definitely. I need a couple more. Why does society not care or think or prioritize disability? Ignorance, definitely.
I think education too, they aren't taught about
Awareness,
people who
yeah.
have life experiences that are different from their own.
Awareness, yeah. Let me start with the first point that was shared, right? It's not a big portion of our society. Actually, we are 1.3 billion individuals in this world with a disability. 16%. Yes, a lot of us might not have non-apparent disability, for sure. You know what's Harvard Business Review came out with an article saying that, if I might be misremembering the number, but 76% of employees with non-apparent disabilities are not comfortable disclosing their disability. That's huge. But we are 1.3 billion. We have over 2 trillion of disposable income as a community. I think it's more than that. But we are a big community. And society and spaces and systems still either don't see us, we're invisible, we're not even part of the picture. If they see us, they might first start off and say, well, you're a vulnerable population, right? I will say we're not vulnerable because systems and spaces do not think about us, but we are vulnerable because these systems and spaces have not built our own perspectives, right? Like, vulnerability comes from where? From when a system has been built and, let's say, a country emergency plan that does not take into consideration the disability perspective. What ends up happening? A crisis happens and we're left behind. And that happens over and over and over again in so many countries. But why are we not at the table? Why is our voice not part of the policies? So then society will say, okay, you want us to think about you? Sure. Let's fix disability. And this is something I was waiting to hear. Society still looks at us as needing to be fixed. There's something wrong in us. And now there's a lot of conversations in terms of eugenics and how do we, as we play with DNA and all that kind of stuff, and removing disability and all that. There's so much science and research around that. And I will say, I remember sitting down with a leader of a country, and that person turned to me and he's like, Sara, my dream is for you not to be blind someday. Imagine a leader is thinking in that way of a country. What ends up happening? How does that translate down to policymaking? That will translate down that let's focus on fixing the people versus let's understand the barriers and fix the systems. So that means we need to change some of the narrative. But then, okay, society says, sure, you want us to fix a system? This goes back to another point that was shared. System will say, well, it's costly. It will take time. You're special. Maybe later. You're an add-on. I remember one time sitting at a meeting, and we were talking about Ukraine in recovery, okay? And I said, how do we ensure when countries are putting funding and financing Ukraine, they're talking about rebuilding green Ukraine. And I said, why don't we put in and say green and accessible Ukraine? And that person turns to me, she's like, well, Sara, can I just say something really, really, I don't want to offend you, but that's going to cost more. And I was like, well, let's do the math. People with disabilities first exist, right? We're at minimum 16% of the world's population. War leads to what? More disability. You're going to have a lot of disabled veterans. So if you are rebuilding a country that's not accessible to us, you're leaving us behind and will become a burden onto the system. That means you're not going to tap into our value and our contribution, and it's going to impact the GDP and on and on and on. Why don't we think of the long-term benefit and the long-term cost? We're only looking at it the short term. And why is it that we are fine providing light for sighted people? We don't see that as a special thing. But when it comes to providing another type of way of accessing, it's seen as a special thing. So, all of these different narratives, and I'll take a couple more narratives that I see over and over again. Then the systems will say, okay, sure, we'll take on disability, we'll prioritize it, but it's only seen from a social protection lens. What do I mean by that? We're pigeonholed in the Ministry of Social, Labor, Education, and Health. Are we seen part of the Ministry of Trade, Investment, Digital Economy, Energy? In most agencies, no. And I'll talk about that later on. But these are the narratives. And the last thing I hear over and over again, right, when it comes to how society is thinking about us is, we are already doing and we're progressing. Please pat us on our back. Stop complaining. Or, oh my God, I just did the Sunflower Initiative event. Let's be grateful. It's one of my biggest pet peeves when someone turns to me and say, we're already doing a lot. And this person does not take a step back and say, what can we do differently? What can we do more? And where are the gaps? So let's start. We're going to start with the State Department. But before I start, I want to see if there's any questions or comments so far. Are we thinking? Or we're not thinking? We're thinking? Very good. Do we have any questions? Any ideas? Any comments? No? Okay, very good. Well, start thinking of questions. Okay, so I want to build out, and I want to kind of walk you through a case study of my experience in the State Department, because that's exactly. A lot of us in this room and beyond will enter systems and spaces, and we actually want to create change. And change is hard, difficult. You're going to ruffle so many feathers. If you're in a system and everyone's happy with you, you're not doing good work. But before you actually say, I want to create change, what you need to do is actually understand the landscape. So when I started in the State Department, in my role. So my role is the U.S. Special Advisor on International Civil Rights, leading U.S. foreign policy and disability. I could do whatever I want with that role. There wasn't that much clarity in terms of what I needed to do. There was only one former U.S. Special Advisor, that was Judy Heumann, who was an amazing legend. I was told, Sara, it's enough for you to be in the room. There was not that much expectations. And from the beginning, that's saying a lot, right? What does that mean when there wasn't that much expectations? It's a real question. It's not just a rhetorical question.
That it's a pretty low bar.
Low bar, yeah. What else?
You're a token.
Token, definitely.
Not a priority.
Not a priority. So our office was placed in at that time, now State Department has changed, okay? I'm talking about the past, not the current. So, was placed in DRL, the Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor Bureau. That bureau is under the Undersecretary of Civil Security, Human Rights, and what?
I think and armed conflict.
Okay. No, armed conflict is T. That's another. So the Undersecretary for Human Rights, okay? So what does that signal to everyone in this room where we're placed?
That
disabilities are treated as a deficiency.
Disabilities treated as a deficiency, okay. What else?
It's not a cross-cutting agenda, so it's only specific to one I guess, particular silo.
It's not a cross-cutting agenda. It's pigeonholed from a human rights lens, right? Which, it is a human rights issue, don't get me wrong. But let me walk you through the other undersecretaries that exist. Undersecretary for Political Affairs. Do you think disability fits there? Yes. Any ideas how? We can come back to that. Think about it. Undersecretary for Economics, and there's a longer title, but for economics. Does it fit there? For sure. Undersecretary for Arms, Conflict, and what? What is it?
And security.
What is it?
Armed conflict and...
Whatever, armed conflicts, where, all the, Does it fit there? For sure. Undersecretary for, I call it Public Affairs, it was R, Public Affairs. Does it fit there? For sure. Undersecretary for Management, it fits there. So, okay, so we enter. I had no experience in the State Department, no experience in foreign policy, let's be real. But my goal was first to understand the landscape, and that's always really important. Never enter a space and assume what you want to do exactly from the beginning. You want to understand the landscape. You want to understand the different voices, the different factions. You want to understand where you're placed, who are the allies, who are the people that can open doors for you. Understanding and mapping out the landscape is super important. So what I did was I had a legacy team, which they were doing certain things in the way they were, knew what to do. And in the beginning, I was like wanting just to understand what exactly was the office doing, what is the landscape, and from there, kind of how do we move forward. My office was very focused initially on very much clearing papers. Do you guys know what that is? So, Hannah, how would you explain that?
Yes, this was a fun part of our job. It would be that every time there was a policy issue within the department that was being developed, multiple different departments that had equity or multiple different bureaus that had equity or offices would have to, quote unquote, clear on it. So they would have to read it, make sure that whatever was in it made sense from their perspective. And so anytime the word disability appeared, like even if it was just in passing, it would come to us. But anytime it didn't appear,
it never came to us. But again, clearing means you read it, does it look good, you sign off, boom. So our office was, before I came, was mainly focused on that, clearing papers. What do you guys think of? What do you guys think of what the impact of that work? Just shout it out. You might not have any thoughts, but I just want to hear. What do you guys think? Not much.
It's not producing anything new.
It's not what?
It's not producing any kind of new policy that changes.
Not producing anything new policies.
They rely on other offices to determine when disabilities are included.
You're realizing on others in terms of when disability was included.
Rubber stamping.
Rubber stamping, exactly. For me, I was like, okay, this is an interesting thing for us to focus on. And to some degree, it could be productive if you had the right work at the center. It would be productive if you were intentionally talking to folks, seeing what the different policies papers that are coming through and seeing how disability can fit in, and working with these colleagues to actually have them understand how disability fits in. But were we doing that? No. We're just checking off the box and maybe just adding the word disability, and there we go. So the first thing I asked the team when I started was, I want to meet with everyone. And that created actually a lot of issues with my office. They're like, what do you mean? You're going to meet with every single leader in leadership? I was like, yeah, I'm going to email every single person. I just couldn't email the secretary, but everyone under the secretary was like, we are going to, So we started meeting. And my goal was threefold. One, the more you start building out relationships and building out your network, that actually is going to help with your work later on. Two, so I wanted them to know our office existed. Most people did not know our office existed. Two, I wanted to actually hear from them what is their thoughts on disability foreign policy. And this is where I heard so many different perspectives of what we just shared earlier. And this is where I wanted us to have the difficult conversations with folks on why disability is, a cross-cutting issue, and it's an issue that brings value to our foreign policy. Third, which is even more important, I would say, with all of this, I wanted to understand what are their priorities. So I would always say, what are your top 3 priorities? And then I would ask them, how does disability fit into those 3 priorities? And that was such a beautiful and amazing exercise. Because I would be meeting with folks like in charge of, I'm trying to choose which one to talk about.
Consular affairs or consular affairs or maybe not. Okay, we'll find another one. They're doing climate action.
No, I mean, yes, every single topic, but I was thinking like, meeting with folks in charge of Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, right? Where, APEC brings 21 economies together and we're trying to promote U.S. foreign policy. And I would ask them, well, how does disability fit into your priorities and into U.S. foreign policy priorities? And what was so beautiful with this exercise is that some people, there was light bulb moments, and they're like, this is exactly like, and others, they're like, I don't got the time for this. And it's fine. I would rather someone turn to me and say, not now, instead of actually say, yes to my face and then they never carry it forward. And that was really important for me to really identify who was really going to carry the work forward with us. I'm going to pause here before I dive more deep into kind of the different things, but going to pause. I want to pause for questions.
How do you deal with the people who are like, oh, this is not important right now? Like when resources.
That's a really good question, and I think I learned there's 2 things. If I thought it was an issue that was really, really important that I really wanted them to carry forward, I learned how to get them to really understand, why this was an important issue that can amplify their work. And I'll come back to that later on. Other times, I learned that right now, this is not the person that is going to open the door for me. And I was fine because I needed to build out the right political capital because later on, I wanted to be able to kind of amplify disability in spaces that were not thought of. And what we ended up doing, and my goal was for the secretary to take on disability in his meetings. I wanted all the assistant secretaries to take on disability in their meetings, and we were able to finally get there. But it took a lot of, when I heard the word no, that told me I need to refine my approach. I need to actually better understand what are their priorities and how to get them to really see that disability fits into their priorities. And that resulted actually in, for instance, U.S.-China relationship. There were only a few areas that U.S. and China were able to agree on. We got disability on the table, which was huge. But that took kind of those different discussions and dialogues and conversation. Another example, Cuba. We were able to get our folks in charge of Cuba that were trying to get political prisoners put out of prison to actually also integrate disability, because there were a lot of political prisoners with disabilities. And they saw disability as an entry point for Cuban government to talk to us. So those are the examples, is getting them to see how disability can be a bridge issue and open up doors, and for us to do the work. So really good question. Other questions?
To have such clarity in the purpose of what you wanted to do, how did you decide on what fundamental questions, or how did you decide on how these three were your fundamental?
So really good question. So I actually I knew that in order for disability to be prioritized, it needed to be integrated into the U.S. national security strategy, the Secretary's strategy. My focus was, what is the State Department's overarching priorities? And there was a list of 5 to 6. I sat down with a team, I said, let's talk about how disability fits into those priorities. Then our goal was then to go and talk to our colleagues that are carrying out some of those priorities. My goal wasn't for people just to, do these things and move forward. My goal was for them to really reimagine how disability fits into their work. That exercise in itself was one of the toughest exercises to do. I'll give you guys an example. When we would do trips to countries, our embassy would organize the trips, right? They would send us the schedule. It was mainly with the meetings with the Minister of Social, Labor, Economic and Health and whatever, and only the Disability Civil Society. We would go back and say, actually, we want to meet with the Minister of Digital Economy or Trade or whatever. And the embassy would be like, why? And that was the starting of the conversation. I do want to meet with the Disability Civil Society, but I also want to meet with mainstream civil society that are not thinking about disability. I do want to meet with the private sector, but I don't want to just meet with the private sector on inclusive employment. I want to meet even broader than that. So even getting the schedule into what we want it to be was an initial exercise. Then we would go to the country. We would first meet with the ambassador and the entire leadership team of the embassy. Usually the ambassador would go around and they're so proud to share what they're doing on disability. And I would say, I don't want to hear that. I actually want to hear what everyone's top 3 priorities are, and I want you to tell me how disability fits into those top 3 priorities. And someone was like, well, one of our priorities is to combat China influence. I was like, okay, let's talk about it. How do you think disability fits into that? He's like, well, it doesn't fit into that. And I said, well, it does. And I would walk them through how that looks like. Someone else is talking about, well, we are working on helping the government to digitize their government services. Is disability, accessibility part of that? So that's what we got them to think about. And that led to the playbook, which I'll talk about later on. Any other questions?
Did you see the ability of someone to accept your ideas more dependent on the sector that they were working in, or was it based on the individual and their ability to consider your options?
I think it was more based on the individual, to be honest. I think it was based on also being able to articulate how it fits in, how disability is an added value to their work. I think also being able to ask the right ask sometimes. Sometimes I had to learn over time what was the ask. I'll give you guys an example. London was hosting the Ukraine Recovery Conference, and the secretary was going there. And I wanted to be on that trip. And I wanted disability, accessibility to be into the secretary's remarks, because not a single other country was actually brought up accessibility. So what I did is we had a colleague and ally who was amazing, and I knew he was the person. This is after building out relationship. This is why relationship is so important. This person was the person in charge of the secretary's schedule. And we became good friends, and I was like, and I told this person, I was like, I'm going to be in London at the same time. Can you get me to the conference? Can you show me the paper? Can we put in X, Y, and Z? We made it as easy as possible so they can say yes. And and understanding who is the right person to ask, how to ask, and how to really get it in. And that was really, and at the end of the day, I was very annoying to a lot of people, because we would, but that was part of the work. I wasn't there to make people happy. I was there for people to understand why disability fits in their work. Other questions?
My name is Avery, and I'm wondering how you navigated, your relationship moving forward with representatives who said that they would be willing to work with you, but presented that they were on the same page as you and then didn't follow through. afterwards?
It's a good question. Hannah, what do you think?
I think, like Sara said, we were very annoying. So honestly, to get us off their back, they would just give in eventually. I would say there are some people that definitely would portray this era of just like, yes, we would love to work on disability, but never really fully commit to doing it. And I think we sometimes would find ways around them, meaning that we would work with someone else that's working in the same issue, or we would find ways to kind of make it as easy as possible, like Sara said, so that they don't even have to do any work. We've already done it. They just really need to sign off. So it depended.
A couple things of what Hannah just said. So one, yes, we were very pushy and annoying. And we had a phrasing in our office, target, insert, mainstream. Like we were just like, but the second thing is, in any meeting, I would, and this is a really huge point that I would recommend for any meeting that you have, always at the end, recap the next steps with clear timeline. So I would say, okay, so I'm going to follow up, my team is going to follow up with your team on this issue by this time, and my team is going to email, then I clearly laid it out. Then we would follow up with an email with what we're asking for. Then the teams, does that make sense? Like I would always ask, who's the person on your team that's gonna be our point of contact? We're gonna follow up with this time. And by the end, if they're not really responsive or they're just, then as Hannah said, we find a workaround and we find another person that we might wanna, might open the door for us. Yeah. Other questions? Okay. So we talked about understanding the landscape, understanding the different factions and meeting with everyone across leadership and beyond. And then don't just focus on leadership, because you're going to have other people in the system truly give you the honest feedback, okay, which is really important. People will tell you where are the access points, where are the influence points in the system. You want to have conversation. When you have a meeting, my recommendation is always start off with connecting on a human-to-human level. And that was a thing we were very known with, is that when I turned to a person, before we start the meeting, I would tell them, tell me about who you are outside of work. Very simple question, very hard. People don't know what to say. But that question itself helps me understand them as a person. We're connecting as a human on a human level. That's gonna help you later on build those relationships, which will then later on be so much impactful for you. Then, as I mentioned, understanding their priorities, having the difficult conversations in terms of what's their narrative on disability, and really trying to have concrete next steps from any of the meetings in terms of how to help them carry disability forward. Then afterwards, what's really important is to really then, and this is an advice I got from someone in the State Department, really start working with folks that are opening doors for you. And for us, we had a lot of amazing allies that opened doors for us on C5+1. So the Central Asian countries plus the U.S. have a dialogue that happens. And we were able to integrate disability into that, which was huge and actually announced by the president. We were able to get, through our relationships with the G7 countries, the Minister of Disability of Italy actually was able to work with us and it launched the first ever G7 Disability Ministerial meeting, which was huge. And I'll come back to that because that work is that's not enough. There's so much more on that front. But these allies really helped us then build out our work. But the question is, how do we sustain that work? And how do we have people truly carry that work for the long term? And that's where building capacity is really important. So we developed a playbook for our leadership and our embassies to showcase how disability fits into every single element of our work. So economic section, political section, human rights section, public affairs section, consular section, we laid it out and we said, this is how disability fits into these different sections. That's helping them build capacity because some will say, yes, we want to do this work, but how? And we want to make the how as easy as possible. And we want to also show them that it's not the disability office that needs to carry this work, it's everyone. But building that capacity is really important. But one thing that there's always an issue is that we will then launch something and pat ourselves on the back, and we stop there, and we don't take it further. And I want to go back to the G7. As you guys know, G7, depending on the country and when they're hosting, so it was Canada last year, it's France this year. There's different ministerial meetings on different topics throughout the year, whether it's AI, whether it's trade, whether it's climate, energy, whatever. During Italy's year, we got them to launch a G7 disability ministerial meeting, which is huge. But, what's the but here? Any thoughts? What happened after? Okay, yeah, good question. What else?
There's a danger of that meeting becoming symbolic rather than the start of action.
Yep, definitely.
No proper continuity.
No proper continuity, yep. So who attended the G7? It was just the disability community and our allies. So yes, it did become symbolic. Yes, there was a declaration, and yes, it was in the leadership statement, but no one else from the broader foreign policy community was there and carried that forward and that kind of stuff. So, if I would reimagine that, how would I reimagine doing that again? Any thoughts?
Bring in people from different sectors.
Okay, definitely. Bring in people in different sectors to be part of the G7 Disability Ministerial Meeting. Yep, definitely. What else?
I would give a table on different topics to it, and I'm thinking about the first time we talked about accessibility for blind persons at the World Bank. Mm-hmm. That we realized that the World Bank, not every building had Braille on it. Mm-hmm. And it's something that people hadn't really thought about, and there was one of the big World Bank meetings, and it's, instead of just putting it on the side as this is a disability thing, it was an accessibility thing. How do people get from point A to point B if the elevators at the World Bank itself don't have Braille on them, or the fact that the chair for the disability office at the World Bank was a wheelchair user, could not get from one part of the building to the other without being carried, right? A whole grown person had to be carried because there was no accessible. So I think when we realize that you have to make it a cross-cutting issue with everything else, every other meeting has to have these meetings as central to it. Doesn't mean that anything is still happening with it, but I think in the moment it was helpful.
Which is such a good point. If most conferences, convening, actually are not accessible for persons with disabilities. You don't see sign language, carts might not be wheelchair accessible, and that prevents us from our voices being part of those spaces, definitely. But then what triggers for people to see that is actually seeing that the disability voice needs to be part of it. How do we get society and systems to say, we need to make sure they need to society and systems need to understand that if I'm leading the AI ministerial meeting, the disability voice is to be there. But no one's calling for that. So going back to the G7, it's a twin-track approach, which is important in the disability community. The G7 Disability Ministerial Meeting needs to continue moving forward and growing. We need to make sure we're inviting experts who are not part of the disability community, but they're coming with different sector experts. That needs to continue being built out, so we're not just talking to each other. But we also need to be working on mapping out all the other working groups and ministerial meeting and saying, we need to insert disability there. That's really important, and I think that's something that we don't tend to do as much. How do we identify and be able to say, hey, you're in charge of climate, make sure disability is there. One of the things that society and systems like to do, and I will end pretty soon, but I really want you guys to focus on this. When you're thinking about how do you convince systems to do the work and to care and do the work that needs to be done, a lot of times systems will fall back on technical solutions. Clearing paper is one example. Employment quota is another example. The G7 Disability Ministerial Meeting, I can see that as a technical solution if it's not built out with intentionality. The real work needs to happen where we truly, truly say, how do we disrupt the narrative? How do we bring disability intentionally forward? So we're not just saying, hey, Ukraine Recovery Conference, let's make sure we just insert the word accessibility, but actually truly the people that are financing recovery and reconstruction efforts, whether it's from Ukraine or whether it's, whatever conflict or post-crisis spaces, how do we make sure that the people that are financing these efforts truly want to see accessibility? But we're far from there. And it goes back to understanding what the narrative and how it's influencing the policies. Sorry, guys, I'm going to stop here. There's so much more, but I just want to make sure we covered the main things. But I'm going to stop here, and I will want to end with one personal thing, is that when someone says no, that's always a sign for us. How do we refine ourselves and come back and approach it in a different way? And that was the main lesson I learned, because I think that's where, we heard so many no's in the beginning, but by the end, we now who knows how much that work is now carried forward. I'm going to stop here because with the current, but I'm going to stop here. Okay, so questions and comments.
Sara, can I ask you, actually it's what you ended on is the current situation and how much of your good work has been undone and how much has been set up that it can still continue, given what we're dealing with today?
It's a good question. I think that the beautiful part is some of the work is being carried forward, but with our allies in terms of other countries, other organizations globally. It's just been beautiful to see some of that. Like, for instance, when we did the G7 in Italy, we had invited the South African Minister of Women, Youth and Disability. And she had committed when South Africa was hosting G20 that she would do a similar disability ministerial meeting. She had committed. So she did carry some of that work forward when South Africa had the president of G20. So some of that has been, but the disability community has been impacted in so many different ways with the fundings and that kind of stuff. So, anyways. And our role hasn't, the role I wasn't, has not yet been filled in. Who knows? And also other questions?
A lot of the connections you make seem to be like an in-person, real-world conversation. How does technology or doing this online impact that, especially if technology isn't completely accessible?
Technology, it could be, it is accessible if we are intentional behind it and we make sure that all the different accessibility features are included. I do like in-person meetings, but also technology has allowed us to keep in touch with our global community, right? And stay in touch with them. So for instance, one of the things that we used to do is do global community engagement. So we keep in communication with our global stakeholders so they know what we're doing and hear from them what they want us to do. And that was really important to kind of do that. So technology does facilitate that. I'm a more in-person person, but it's important that with any meeting, I would always ask, what are some accessibility needs, and to make sure everyone's able to access and be included. Yeah, good question. Other questions?
You mentioned in the China-U.S. relationships how an agreement was reached on disability. I'd love to hear more about how disability could be a common ground in situations of intense political conflict.
That's a really good question. So, disability is an amazing diplomacy tool. It helps us with our U.S.-China relationship. It's one of the few areas across the entire Southeast Asia region, ASEAN, that the 10 countries can agree on. It helped us with Cuba. It helped us with, as I mentioned, in for instance, Turkmenistan. It's hard to get government meetings, but when I went and visited community centers, we were able to meet with most government agencies. Disability is, again, it's an amazing double-edged sword. It will open doors. People a lot of times are open to discussing, engaging. They feel like it's not threatening. But on the other hand, the question is, how are they taking it forward? And that's the important question. In most spaces, it's not being carried forward in the way we want it to be carried forward. But it's an amazing diplomacy tool. And that's the course that we're teaching at Georgetown University, Disability and Diplomacy. And I think it's an underutilized tool, and people are like, oh my God, Sara, like, you're exploiting disability. I'm like, no, I'm not exploiting disability. I think disability, when you're able to use as a tool to open doors, then we can come in and do the work that we need to do. Other questions?
Hi, my name is Adela. I wonder if you saw yourself as working as sort of a medium between the disabled community and the government, and if so, what it means to be trying to change an institution while trying to serve a community that has lost trust in that institution.
It's a really good question. Actually, this brings me to kind of one of the meetings that we did, which I was really happy with, was we brought all 5 Central Asian countries' civil society meet with their government across the table. So like all 5, so Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan, the governments on one side, civil society on the other side, and we facilitated dialogue where we wanted to kind of have the government hear the needs of their civil society. That usually never happens. A lot of times civil society is not able to really express what their needs were. So those are the things that we used to kind of be able to do. Another example, actually, Gaza was something we focused a lot on. This is more the needs of people with disabilities in Gaza, and bringing it to our National Security Council in the U.S. We did a roundtable where we brought voices of persons with disabilities in Gaza and their just awful and horrific situations, and how when you are a person with a disability in a place of conflict, their needs are manifold. Like, there's so many more needs, and we brought that to the National Security Council because I wanted them to hear as they are, So those are the things that we always wanted to see how we can bring those voices to the different government institutions. Other questions?
Sarah, you say that your role hasn't been filled, and I was reading about that. If you were asked to go back to that role, is that something that you would consider?
In this administration? I have another role that I've been asked, but not for the federal government, so no. Here's my thing. The reason I would say no, not because of, I think I would wanna, I'll just say no. Is this recorded, this session? Okay, I'm exploring other options. Other questions?
My name is Marco, and my question is, how do you combat stigmatization on disability in the workplace? So, for example, an able-bodied person with assumptions on their professional abilities.
It's a really good question. I mean, ableism comes in so many different forms, and also it comes in terms of when you're asking for accommodation. Sometimes the system will turn to you and say, you're asking for too much, you're being difficult. Sometimes, the system will say, oh, like, it's okay. Like, when you're asking for certain things, you say, no, or do less. Sometimes you are judged, there's so many different layers to this. And I was really frustrated sometimes when systems will be like, oh, we're going to do the Sunflower Initiative. I don't know if you guys know the Sunflower Initiative. It's like talking about non-apparent disability. That does not solve the issue, guys. It does not. What solves the issue is when we train managers and employers, and I will say to managers and employers, I want you to turn to your team and ask one simple question. What do you need to thrive in this working setting? That's it. I want you to truly ask that question and truly be a partner. They might not need to reveal they have a disability or not. I don't care. But what do they need to thrive in this working setting? What are the barriers you're facing in your working setting? And how can I be a partner to break down those barriers? We need more of that training to managers and employers. And if we do approach it from that, then there will be some people that will be able to express and share and, and two blind people don't have the same experience. So I think there's so much more work to be done on the workforce side of things and getting employers to really be truly partners with employees with disabilities. One great, I would say, institution is Microsoft, actually, as a company. They have Jenny Leigh Fleury. She's a chief accessibility officer, and she was able to truly impact Microsoft both internally and also externally. So I would always look at kind of practices, best practices like those. Really good question. Other questions?
I'm Julia, and I have a question touching on how you were income major while you were faculty. And so you're familiar with the idea of GDP being the default measure of well-being of the country, but in reality, we could include so many more measures that accurately paint a better picture. So in the case where we've already addressed the long-term productivity benefits of including disability in the conversation and policy, and your colleagues continue to be hung up on their notions of cost, how do you emphasize going beyond the accounting level to emphasize that collective welfare needs more than the school numbers?
I mean, it's a good question. So there's two sides to this. So there needs to be more research on the economic side. There is a little bit of research, and I think this was actually World Bank research. It's estimated that up to 3 to 7% of GDP is impacted when you don't include the disability community into employment, into the labor force. Just sometimes those numbers people are not aware of, and I think having even the economics kind of numbers conversation with folks makes a difference. But on the other hand, I always want to also bring in the tangible elements of what are the barriers that truly exist for us and what are the innovation that we can bring forward. Because a lot of times people don't understand when I say, hey, make sure technology and AI is being developed in a way that's accessible for us. And people are like, well, what do you mean? We had a meeting with a digital minister of a country, and he did not understand that until I walked him through what I meant, of how it leaves us behind if digital tools are not built in an accessible way. And then I had to walk him through, if digital platforms are not accessible, then we as a disability community cannot access, but also we cannot contribute, and you're not tapping into our market, and the market base that we can provide, and on and on. So those conversations are helpful, but also beyond that, where people don't really realize is the innovation side of things that we can bring forward. A lot of tools like text messaging came from the deaf community's need. Those Siri and Alexa from there's so many technology and innovation out there that came from our need and our innovation. How do we bring more of those voices forward? And my thing I would always say, we need more partnership with media, entertainment, and social media on these fronts. That's what we lack. We haven't been able to really break through the current narratives. Most people, when I have conversations with them, they were like, huh? I would say 98% of the time, which is shocking. And these are people, one time I remember meeting with a minister of trade, I think, or whatever. He's like, in my 30 years, I've never came across disability in trade. Seriously? So, but there's not that much research on disability in trade, if you think about it. There's this amazing professor in Mexico that she's working on it. How are we not talking more about that and more research? And this goes back to then academia and universities and being able to foster some of those thought leaderships and those ideas. Other questions? Yes.
My name is Elise. And I guess even to that question, so you mentioned that you have a forthcoming course on disability and diplomacy at Georgetown. And I guess I have a question about what you see as the future of disability education. I feel like oftentimes as students we'll do research or write papers while the course is in session, and once it ends, kind of the work also ends with it. So I'm wondering, I guess, how do you see this course and also just disability education as a whole being not just an informational experience for students, but also being a mobilizing experience as well?
That's a really cool question. So our course actually, and this is actually due to Hannah's idea, the project is having them write an op-ed on disability and foreign policy in a way that can be mainstream, and there's a really powerful hook, and it is, it attracts an audience, for instance. And we wanted that because we wanted people to think about, again, goes back to this media connection, media partnership, and how do we bring more of the disability narrative forward. So that was kind of a simple way of kind of connecting those dots for the long term. But going back to your question, this is where it's important. If you think about it like an institution like the Harvard Kennedy School, you have different centers, right? You have the Belfer Center, which focuses on foreign policy, right? You have the Carr Center, which focuses on human rights. You have Ash Center, I think they focus on democracy, whatever. There's different centers. A lot of the special envoys from the State Department when we left the Biden administration, special envoys for human rights, like LGBTQI and racial equity and labor and women, and they deformed, they went and became senior fellows at the Carr Center of Human Rights at the Kennedy School. And then when we were talking, I was like, I don't want to actually have disability there. I want to go to the Belfer Center. Why? Because I want disability to be seen from the security lens, the economic lens, the trade lens, the AI. Like, it's more than just the human rights. And I think this is where it's important for institutions to really think creatively where disability fits in. And how do we really truly have amazing thought leaders, thought leadership being developed in those kind of spaces. Okay, I think I'm done. Thank you.
Hi, Sara. Thank you so much, and Hannah, thank you both so much. And Sara, you're just incredible. We learned so much today from your wisdom, and as I said, the bright light of Wellesley in the world, truly. So everybody who didn't get your questions answered, you're in luck because Sara graciously agreed to join us for a reception right after this. So please go right out there into the hub. We'll follow shortly. Enjoy snacks and some nice food, and then more questions for Sara if you have them. Thank you all so much for coming.